So this is a review for Tokio Jokio, released in 1943. It's the 402nd in the series, and it's directed by McCabe. As you may have already figured out, this has not received any home media release, and probably never will. It is in the public domain, but much like what I did with the Censored 11, I'm not going to show this one here. It's way too hateful, but you can find it pretty much anywhere online anyway if you really do need to see it. I just want to focus on the history and as to why this short would have been made in the first place. So first up, you're going to see are the highlights of the audio commentary, which I still have up on the channel with my good friend Austin Kelly as we discuss a few points in this one. Then after that, I want to go through the short in more depth because one of the criticisms that were laid on that commentary was we didn't really get into it too much. And I get it. There's definitely a lot more that we could have talked about. So here's my chance to fix that one up and then never see this short ever again. So without further ado, let's get into it. With me today to discuss this cartoon that's really no laughing matter is my good friend Austin Kelly. Say hi.
I really don't know why I'm here. It's
well, to keep me from just screaming at the screen really. Okay, so let's put this into context. You know, in case you've discovered this video just through recommendation or whatever, and why I'm looking at this. So we're looking at every cartoon, good, bad, and ugly, and in this case is ugly. So this was done after Pearl Harbor. America were in war, and of course, this is one of those quote-unquote feel-good cartoons that were done to sort of make the Americans feel, happy, but, by making fun of the enemy, and it's not good. It's not good at all.
This is your thought directly. I'm stealing it, but you can just say more about it just because I think it's an interesting thing. The idea of, discovering a newsreel from another country and hearing what they have to say about us is actually a really funny idea, but, when you do it like this, with all these stereotypes, it's no one's going to really want to watch this. This is just harmful and painful.
A cartoon that did, a propaganda thing right, that's kind of similar to this, is Disney's De Furious Face, where, it had some stereotypes to be sure around the beginning, but it was a very clever way of making fun of the enemy about, working 28 hours a day for the Fuehrer and that sort of stuff, those sort of funny jokes. But here it's just making fun of Asian people, and that's pretty much it,
Yeah.
There are a few things that they do point out, which was kind of true at the time, where they were showing in the beginning about how the home defense in Japan wasn't particularly good. That was actually true. They did not have the best defense at home, and they didn't really look after their citizens pretty well while the Japanese soldiers were out to war.
I've said it many times, but I think a lot of the bad or worse cartoons that the Warner Studio made have some interesting stuff about them. And while I do think this is generally a pretty crappy and unfunny cartoon, the animation is actually not bad, and there are two guys in this cartoon. That's Izzy Ellis right there. This is tree gag. There are two guys in the cartoon, animator-wise, you really wouldn't expect in a McCabe cartoon. There's Art Davis, and there's Phil Monroe, who came out. He had a fight with Friz Freleng. He was angry at him. He didn't like his style of directing. Oh, and this guy, this donkey scene, this is Ray Patton. This is a Disney animator. All kinds of weird stuff animator-wise in this cartoon. But, no, yeah, they're all doing their best. So I think the animation here is pretty decent. But I think that's Phil Monroe with the Hitler gag.
Compare this one to, say, the Censored 11 stuff with the African-American stereotypes and all that stuff. See, those were made with good intentions, I feel. Yes, they were misguided and all that. Here, this was a deliberate thing to be against the enemy. It's interesting. We've had, America's had wars since, but you wouldn't see this sort of stuff making fun of, I don't know, the North Vietnamese or, the Iraqis or anything like that. This was just kind of unique in that it only really happened in World War II, but not even for the Korean War. I don't recall any Korean War propaganda things.
I don't think... Here's more Phil Monroe right here. I don't think so. It's, okay, look, that's a nice bit of animation. I like that. Good old Phil Monroe doing as best as he always is.
Yeah.
But yeah, only thing I like about
Yeah, but
what can you say about this thing? Like the animation, that's pretty much it. I'm not gonna rewatch it anytime soon.
so as mentioned, that track is up on the channel, and really a lot of it was just discussed at watching the short, but that's not really too educational, which is in the spirit of what these are supposed to be. So I guess here's my chance to make this right. First of all, you'll see in the title card that Norm McCabe is referred to as Corporal Norm McCabe. So he was drafted to the army, and the last few shorts he would have finished and then gone off to war. But this one, according to Michael Barrier's book, he saw on some sort of a list that Frank Tashlin had actually finished this one, because after this, Frank Tashlin takes over this unit and directs a small but very memorable series of shorts, much like he did in the 30s. So basically, he worked at Warner's. Well, he was first an animator, then he left. He came back as director, but then he left again. He went to Disney. Then he did some more cartoons at Columbia, and now he's back at Warner's. And then after this, he more or less then winds his way out to live-action films. So this spot gag short is a parody of newsreels, which, as mentioned in the comment track, is actually a good idea. What would a newsreel from another country look like at the time, especially during wartime? How does the enemy see us, and that sort of thing. But the end result, this definitely comes from a place of hate, and that's no doubt due to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, which would have still been fresh on people's minds at the time, especially those who made this short, because, as you may know, cartoons take a while to make, even short ones, so it would have been really fresh on the minds of those making this. Now, strangely enough, when the short opens, it strangely shows the title, Tokio Jokio, after the credits. I'm not sure why that was done, if it was artistic or whatever, but it is what it is, and it's the first time, I believe, in Looney Tunes that it's done. So we see in the beginning the Nippon News of the Week, and that's a parody of the Pathé News, and they even have the rooster logo in the beginning, but of course the Vulture pops out and we see that it's something totally different. I'll admit I do like the animation of the Vulture there. In fact, as Austin mentioned, and I do agree with him on this short is actually filled with wonderful animation. You just have to really squint and go, ooh, those caricatures, ooh. But anyway, it is what it is, I guess, but yeah, I can definitely appreciate it. And another thing I can appreciate in this one are the backgrounds by Dave Hilberman, and it's no secret that I made that one of the great things about the later half of the shorts that he ended up making were the Dave Hilberman backgrounds. So at least here, again, if you put aside the caricatures and all that stuff, you can appreciate the work that went into them. So let's look at each of the gags, which none of them are really funny, although some of them in a different context might work as funny gags, but yeah, we'll go through all of them and see if we can pick out all the references. So we start off with a civilian defense gag, and it's to do with an air raid siren, and it just involves pinpricking between two Japanese men and just yelling out. Not funny. Again, this is just out of hate and just making fun of just how barbaric and backwards these Japanese were. That's the viewpoint at the time. But it is what it is. Then we see a listening post, which, look, again, this could work as a dad joke in another context, but here, yeah, it doesn't quite work for me. And another dad joke, the spotter's detail. So this is like one of those Tex Avery style gags that you would see sometimes, and the guy's painting spots. Okay, you know, that is funny, but within this context, it's not really. But anyway. Now, the Fire Prevention Headquarters. Now, I believe I know the context of this one, because at the time, Tokyo still had lots of traditional buildings that were flammable, because a lot of it's, of course, wood and the sleeping mats and that sort of thing. A lot of it's just wooden. And certain parts of Tokyo were modern, to be sure, especially after the great earthquake of the early 20s that they had. So they had to rebuild at the time with stronger material, but there was still plenty of places in Japan, not just in outer Tokyo, that were made out of wood. So you can imagine that fire would have been a huge problem at the time if something were to go wrong. So the Incendiary bombs lesson 1. So the guy waits for 5 seconds as instructed, and then he tries to cook a sausage. He gets blown up, and he says, "Losing face, please," and then he has no face. One could look at that and just go, what on earth are they trying to play at here? I looked into it. So face is considered like a class of behaviors and customs, and it's associated with honor, to have face, and it's like a sociological concept that I was reading about, and it's linked to dignity, prestige. So him having no face, well, that makes sense now, doesn't it? Is it funny? No, but that's what it means here anyway. The kitchen hints. So this is a caricature of Hideki Tojo, and he's certainly no stranger to being caricatured, not just in Warner Brothers, but in other war-related cartoons. So he was the Prime Minister of Japan, and he was a figure of Japanese ultranationalism and extremism, and later on he would be convicted and executed for war crimes. Is the gag funny? Not really. I get what they're trying to do here, where they had the rationing cards, so he makes a sandwich out of ration cards. You know, it's clever, I'll give it that, but again, it's not funny. But it also shows that even in Japan at the time, which is true, they also had rationing as well because of the war going on. And then he hits his head with a club. Yeah, club sandwich. Ha ha, sure. And just this grotesqueness perfectly shows that this was really also to make fun of the Japanese people purely out of hate over what they did at Pearl Harbor, of course. Style show with the Japanese victory suit. I don't really get this one, so if you know, let me know in the comments, but essentially it's no cuffs, pleats, and lapels, and then it shows the Japanese person as being basically naked. But this one could be the worst one of all, because it's showing him wearing, well, we say nappy, you guys in the US say diaper, and it's showing that the enemy are really just subhuman and just worthless human beings, basically. Is this like an Emperor's New Clothes type of thing? I don't know. So if you can explain this one to me, let me know in the comments. You do hear jingle bells in a Japanese style in the background, which is one of the very, very few interesting things about this short. So we're on to sport. So the guy, he's named Red Toga-san, and I looked into this. So that appears to be a mix of some sports journalists, and one is Red Barber, and the other one's Stan Thorgensen. I don't know much about him, but it appears the name is just a mixture of them. Then the teeth fall out, and it's revealed to be made in Japan. So, of course, the joke's aged terribly, not just because of the racial part, but it's also aged terribly because Japanese make some of the best quality goods in the world. Yeah, that didn't age well, of course. I don't think anyone at the time would have ever predicted that Japan would end up becoming a superpower a few decades later, but anyway. So we see the Japanese king of SWAT, and keep in mind, Japan is huge on baseball, so at least it makes sense here why there'll be a Japanese baseball player. In fact, US would be the biggest baseball country, but Japan is pretty big too. You should see a game in Japan. It's really, really interesting. And now the King of SWAT is a play on Babe Ruth's nickname, the Sultan of SWAT, and, well, as you can imagine, as soon as the fly enters, because a lot of this short is also wishful thinking, the fly ends up winning and swatting the Japanese man and winning the trophy. Of course, right? And it's just another way to show how inept the Japanese were at the time. Sure. So headline personalities, we see a caricature of Izuruku Yamamoto. So he was the Grand Marshal of the Japanese military navy and one of those responsible for Pearl Harbor, so you can imagine why they'd want to put him in this short. Although, interestingly, and this just tells you how slow cartoons are made, when this short was released, he was actually killed the month prior. And so the short is showing a wishful thinking, of course, that the man seen as responsible for Pearl Harbor is executed. Well, he was shot down. Next bit has General Homer, and he was a lieutenant general in the Japanese Imperial Army, and later on he was convicted of war crimes after World War II. The gag shows the opposite of remaining calm during an air raid, so it's like a Tex Avery style gag, and for good measure we've got a skunk thinking that this particular lieutenant general is, well, he stinks. Makes sense, I guess, in the context of war. It's one of the lesser harmful gags in this short, but that doesn't really make much of a difference, does it? What's really interesting is flashes from the axes. So we see a donkey called Law Hee-Haw, and I had to look into that, and that's a parody of Lord Haw-Haw, who was real name William Joyce. I can't imagine you calling a child Lord Haw-Haw, but anyway. So he was a Nazi propagandist who broadcast from Germany to the UK a show called Germany Calling. So it was like a propaganda machine saying, hey, your life in the UK is terrible. It's a paradise here in Nazi Germany, so head on over. And he's not the only one to do that. There were many people that defected to Germany upon promises of a better life. And we all know how that turned out, of course. We see a postcard to Hitler from Rudolf Hess, and interestingly, it shows that he's in a prison camp, right? But at the time the short was made, he really did get shot down, and he was in a prison camp. So, while the other stuff were more wish fulfillments and that sort of thing, here, this actually would have been something that the animators at the time would have seen happen, and thus added in, and we see Hitler acting a bit like Charlie Chaplin, twitching his mustache, so, yeah. We see Rome, and we see Mussolini in ruins, and we hear Largo del Factorum, as we typically would, because we're in Italy, right? So when this short was released, Mussolini was pretty much starting to lose a lot of power, because a lot of his army was experiencing major setbacks from various allied powers, like some battles in northern Africa and that sort of thing. And I'm not going to get into too much history and I realize some of these points I am oversimplifying, but otherwise I'd be here forever if I go into detail on a lot of this. And given that this short was made much earlier, again, this would have been more of a wish fulfillment about Rome being blown up because of Mussolini. So this ended up coming to pass somewhat, with Rome being bombed a few months after this short was released. And this, by the way, features some of my favourite backgrounds. I don't like seeing Rome in ruins or anything, but the way it's drawn is really, really nice. The Japanese Navy all at sea, so submarines are being built ahead of schedule, so the submarine passes and we see they're literally still building it as it's being used, and that's clearly a play on the fact that equipment, and not just for the Japanese, but pretty much all sides of the war, they really had to get the equipment out there as quickly as possible, and not jeopardize the pilots and such. I would imagine the safety standards would not have been as stringent by the Japanese at the time, given the nature of their part of the war, but I could be wrong there. I haven't looked too much into that, but definitely let me know in the comments below if that was the case, whether Japanese standards of building their war equipment just wasn't particularly high due to the need to get things out there. So we see inside the submarine, so it looks very important. It's establishing, hey, there's all this delicate machinery, but in a Tex Avery style fashion, we see that they're just playing various arcade machines and what looks to be like pachinko machines in the back, which would make sense because that's a major Japanese gambling pastime. The pachinko parlors were closed during the war, but it was definitely a major Japanese pastime. I do like the idea of this gag, and funnily enough, this gag was actually reused later on in a Bugs Bunny short, and I'll explain why in a sec. But I like the idea here, so you got this happy gentleman, and the narrator saying, are you happy? And you're doing this dangerous work as the human torpedo, which is a dark joke in itself, of course, and then he's asked, what do you have to say? And his response is, let me out of here. A similar gag, again, as I mentioned, it's in a Bugs Bunny short. It's at the end of Hair Devil Hair, where he's on the moon, where he's like, get me out of here. So that's probably a great example of how a gag, it's in a racist short, but then it's reused in a good short and done in a much funnier and better way. And then we end with all sorts of dad jokes. So we got the catapult device. Sure, why not? We see another one with the tricycle landing gear, showing the inferiority of their military complex. Of course, we got to do that. It's a propaganda short after all. We see the remains of the Skinamaroo aircraft carrier, showing once again hopes to the audience as to what they would want to happen. And we get the final dad jokes of a literal minesweeper. And we end with regrettable incident, please. If you do watch this short, continue on and laugh at Porky saying that's all, folks, because that's probably the only really funny thing in this short. To put this into more perspective, recently someone shared clippings of these theatre reviewers of various shorts, and one of them was saying that Tokio Jokio was a whole lot of fun, or something along those lines, that's a whole lot of laughs. Yeah, that's pretty much the mindset at the time. Pearl Harbor really did affect a lot of people in the US, for sure, understandably. So this one gets a 1 out of 10. It truly is awful, but the only things I can really like about it are the backgrounds. If I can see these backgrounds without anything else, I would genuinely want to see it. The animation, which once again, I agree with Austin that at least the animation was done really well. And a few of the music cues are interesting. That's pretty much it. There you are. That's all the information there regarding Tokio Jokio. Now to move on to much better cartoons. So, that'll do it for this review. Until next time, take care.